Today we are talking about the hazards of working with heavy equipment, and here's why we're talking about it. First of all, it's going to apply to all of you who are out there, whether you're operators or whether you are just on the job while the operation is going on. It can be the difference between you surviving or someone else surviving the job, and these are just really simple reminders that could save your life or at best keep a co-worker or even a passerby alive because you know how they like to come out and visit your jobs. So let's do a quick review. If I can slide to change. All right, so heavy equipment hazards. So this time of year, a lot of you are, oops, I'm a page ahead of myself. A lot of you are out there and you are working with loaders, right? It's a pretty common piece of equipment to find in a public works facility. And it's, all of you should be able to go out there and load your own vehicle, your own truck if you need to for snow operations. But I'm going to start this just by saying, and you've heard this before, your vehicle is designed for 3 points of contact. You will get nothing done if you can't actually get into it safely or get out of it. So make sure you use 3 points of contact when you're entering or exiting. Check for debris on any of the steps and handles. Look for stones, snow and ice, dirt, grease, fuel, anything that can make you slip or fall off. And again, don't try to bring all your tools or your equipment in there at the same time. You can pick that stuff up and put it in one at a time later. That's not the time to shoving it all in there while you're climbing in is just not a good idea. Some heavy equipment is designed to handle very large volumes or heavy loads. That's what it's for. Therefore, there are powerful machines that are dangerous to everyone around them, and if they're not operated correctly, it can be it can be life or death. It's important to remember the proper methods to use to move them from one site to another and how to work around them in their operations. Some of the ways we are going to discuss this today are going to be around general rules for working near the equipment, some general rules for transporting the equipment, some guidance for workers, and some guidance for operators. So everybody out there has a different type of swivel they need to keep their head on, right? And if you listen to these daily meetings or these weekly tailgate talks long enough with me, you'll hear me say this many times. You all need to have your head on a swivel while you're working out there. You need an acute situational awareness of what's going on. There are already so many hazards around you, and being unaware of any of them, can be deadly. One of the ways to make people aware of the hazards that are out there is to have a daily meeting or a pre-operational meeting or whatever it is you do before you actually go out and do the job. Make sure everyone is near it. Everyone associated with the job is going to be there, and that you talk about all of the hazards that could potentially happen, right? Anything that could be going on, what the jobs are, what all the pieces are going to be, where the positions of the vehicles are going to be or the equipment is going to be, and just let everybody know. If you don't need to be near the equipment, don't. You don't need to be right up next to it where it could crush you or hurt you. Don't be near it. Everyone has a specific function that requires them to be, um, close. But if you don't need to be right in it, don't. Never ever ride on it, right? You're out there, and I've seen people, in buckets or doing whatever. Don't ever do that. It's not designed for people to be in. They're designed. This picture right here is clearly designed for people to be standing on, but going at very slow speeds, right? You're not going to go over the highway on this thing or very far. None of these pieces of equipment are designed for people to be riding on. You can only sit in the seat with the seatbelt on to be functioning in it. How do you know if something like this is designed for you? It will have a seat and it will have a seat belt, or it will have a place for you to stand, or it will be designed for specific speeds. So don't ever ride on something that's not designed for you to be on. And stay visible. You know, every piece of equipment has blind spots. You should know what they are. You should talk about those at your pre-operational or your pre-work meeting, and they may all be different. Every single one of these pieces of equipment up here has different blind spots. Always let the operator know you're there before you approach a piece of equipment. So if you're coming into a job site, get their attention somehow or stay away until they notice you, and then you can, approach them. Don't ever walk in between pieces of equipment. And know what the alarm sounds are going to be, right? At this pre-operational meeting, make sure everybody knows, what the backup alarm should sound like. for every different piece of equipment that's out there. Know what it's doing and what the sounds it's going to make mean. And always, always, always wear PPE, whatever it is. Always have it and have it clean and be as visible as possible. Again, this could be the difference between you surviving or not. All right, we're going to talk about transporting here a little bit because you've got to get this piece of equipment from one place to another before you can operate it most of the time. Before you load anything, check the transporting equipment for good working condition, right? The piece of equipment that you're going to move it on has to have a pre-trip too. So make sure it's working, make sure everything's in place, make sure all the lights are on, make sure that it can properly transport your piece of equipment to where you need it. Load it in an area that's away from the job hazards or the traveling public as much as possible. Don't just pull up to where it ended its work and, pull it onto a transport vehicle. Get it out of the way. Get out of the traffic. Get out of the job as much as possible. And if you have to, I mean, sometimes there's just no place to go. If you're in on a highway situation, you can't get off or a bridge or whatever. Provide traffic control if you have to around the piece of transport equipment. And a lot of times this is where people get their toes hurt and their feet crushed. So again, all that PPE that you're going to wear, that you're going to have on should include safety shoes as well. Sometimes your load is going to look a little like this, right? You're going to have something really big. It's going to hang off the sides, and you need to make sure that it's balanced and that you can get it from one place to the other without creating another hazard by tipping over or having it fall off. Um, so, and a lot of you guys are going to do this more and more and more. And the more you do it, the more you're going to know where the center of gravity is for the piece of equipment that you're hauling. And you need to really make sure that's right on the truck properly and put as much of the load over those rear tires as you can. Um, Load it safely. Make sure that you're going slow and that you're taking all the precautions that you can and that you put all your flags on and all your proper um, lights are showing once it's on. You're not covering anything with another piece of the equipment, and that you can see at least as much as possible. This poor guy here doesn't have much of a rear view sight, but he's probably got some serious spotters out there helping. If that's the case and you need someone to you know escort your load for you, make sure you take care of that as well. Here's another piece of the conversation that sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. You have to have that load secured on that transport equipment with proper tie downs. And, I think there may be a Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act um, regulation for tie downs, but most states are requiring you to use grade 70 rated chains or nylon straps and to tie down at least 4 points on the piece of equipment that's being transported. But again, check your manufacturer's recommendation, check your state regulations for what those are. After you get it up onto the piece of equipment that's going to move it, make sure that you secure all of the booms, any of the movable arms, or any extensions that may fly off this thing. Make sure all the doors are secured and that you pick up all of the tools and the pieces of equipment that you used to put it up there before you take off. Can't tell you how many chains I found on the side of the road, how many of those keeper straps I found laying there because people just drove off and left them there. But the important thing is that you use a proper chain, right? You can't just tie this down with a swing set chain or something. It's got to be on there. It's got to be secured pretty good. Because here's what you're trying to avoid. Who wants to look in the rearview mirror and see something like, what any of these pictures look like? Who wants to see the load shifted completely to one side and have to scramble to either get over before it all falls onto somebody or whatever? I mean, there are serious hazards that could happen out here. Who wants to have this load of metal beams come through the back windshield of your truck, right, and right through the middle? These are the hazards. These are the things that are happening out there now. That's why we're talking about this. Because that probably decapitated the driver or seriously injured whoever was driving that vehicle. Or at the very least, you could end up on your side. And who wants to call the boss and explain any of this, right? Who wants to make this call back to the office, or who wants to have this call made to your family that something tragic has become of you because you didn't properly tie down your load, um, or worse, you could be liable for all these violations. Anything that could occur on your license, you are liable for. Another thing to remember is to have good housekeeping processes. Don't let your tools become road find. All those needle nose pliers and all those great wrenches and things that you may have collected over the years, that was because somebody left it where it was vulnerable and fell off a vehicle or fell off of a truck and they never picked it up. But the other thing is too, don't kill yourself to run out there and get those things when they fall off. None of that stuff, those bungee cords, all those things that you guys are running out there to pick up, they're a dime a dozen, and none of them are worth dying for. But at the same time, they could cause hazards if they fall off your vehicle and land on another one that's driving down the road, or fly up and come through someone else's windshield. Um, don't let that be you. Don't you be the one that's out there causing those hazards on the highway. And don't lose your tools, right? They're too expensive. And again, this goes back to a little bit about that pre-operational meeting and some of the communications that are going to have to take place while you folks are out there. Always, always, always know what the signals are that the operator is going to use. Don't ever assume. We're all out there right now and we think that, we know what this means, we know what this means, we know what this means. We don't know what the operator is trying to say unless we've had a conversation and we are sure what their signals mean. Do not make assumptions about hand signals when you're on the job operating with this heavy equipment. This all comes down to life and death with some of this stuff. Make sure you're aware of the position of the equipment and your visibility to the operator. Make sure that operator can see you if they have to as much as possible, and that you know where they are and where that piece of equipment is going to move and how it's going to operate out there. Um, Also watch out for overhead hazards. So they don't always mark, some of these small temporary work zones you folks are setting up out there, they don't always mark those overhead hazards with the big balls or anything like that, but they may be there. So watch out for all of that, as well as any suspended loads, right? If you're walking beneath anything that's hanging in the air, if you're picking stuff up, um, stay clear of suspended loads. And if you do have to move any of those, make sure you use guidelines on the load to manipulate it. Don't ever try to move it with your hands. Um, and here's another thing. It's like, y'all might get a break, you're out there and suddenly it's, lunchtime or whatever. And it's like, okay, let's take a break. And don't ever sit around the equipment while you're taking a break. That's not a good place to be. Get away from it if you have to stop and have your lunch or take your break. Um, it's just not a good idea to get into the habit of doing any of those things. You never know when that, you may not see the operator get in it. They may not be aware that you're there either. Um, when you do take a break, make sure you're, or whatever you're doing, you've got to, if you've got traffic control out there, make sure that the traffic controller is also aware of the movements of the equipment. Some of you may be hiring traffic control to come in. They may not be your own crew members, and you may not have that familiarity with them that you would if they were in your own crew. Invite them to your pre-operational meeting as well, so they know what you folks are doing and what the equipment is going to be doing, and all of the stuff that everybody on that job needs to know. um, and make sure they know what their function is going to be, what to expect as far as stopping work, and where the equipment needs to be repositioned. Those are things you should talk about. All right, here's some operator responsibilities. All movable equipment must have a working backup alarm or be accompanied by a signal person. So every single thing you folks are using out there should have an audible backup alarm, as well as visible lights. You should all be aware of those overhead hazards and the effect on the equipment operating in the area. And if you've got crane booms or anything that's up there, you need to keep it at least 10 feet away from the power lines so that you don't get that arcing effect and electrocute anything or energize your equipment. Always, 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 always use lockout tagout procedures before you lubricate, oil, before you do anything on that, or just anything on that piece of equipment. Never leave the keys in or leave yourself vulnerable to anybody getting in there and starting it up and creating some sort of hazard for you. If you've got glass in your equipment, and you're working around lots of rocks or things that could come in there, make sure that you cover it with pieces of wood or metal, sometimes old signs or whatever. Whatever you need to do to protect the glass from breaking or on you. And here's another big one. Never, ever, ever allow unauthorized personnel to operate the equipment. If you're not training somebody and if you're not right there while you're training them, they should not be in that equipment, ever. Nobody should be able to operate a piece of equipment that they are not familiar with or that they have not been properly trained on and evaluated on. Here's a pet peeve of mine because I've seen so many horror stories and seen so many horrible pictures, but children do not belong on these pieces of equipment except in a controlled environment. This is a place called Diggerland where children can go, and this is set up specifically for them. They're monitored, and this is okay. But never, ever, ever should you have a piece of equipment like this in your yard or at your job and think that you could put your child in there or any child in there and have fun with it. Um, that fun can go south really quickly, and nobody wants to be around when that happens. The safety world is full, just chock full of horror stories about children who were maimed or killed by pieces of equipment. Many of those accidents were under the supervision of an adult, whether it's a lawn tractor, your own little lawn tractor that you're out there cutting your grass with, an excavator, a bobcat, a snowblower, a wood chipper, whatever it is, there is a horror story to go with it when it involves children. They do not belong anywhere near any of this stuff. So don't let any child that you know become a horror story or a news story at all. Okay, do we have any questions about heavy equipment operations and the hazards that go? Does anybody have anything to add that I maybe didn't talk about today? Okay, it will be that will be the end. I just want to leave you all with what I always say at the very end is that we are not doing these because something may happen to you someday. We're doing it because we know they already have happened. These things have happened to people, and these are the lessons that we've learned. So I hope you can take this to your crew, take it further, and don't become a tailgate talk. Thank you guys.